Once again, where do I find my own stream on the channel? Seems to work. All right. This will be the second part of the stream where again I'm going to work on the kick drum. Last Sunday we finished with this kick sound. Also, what I've said is that we need more equalization, especially on the rumble part of it. So when it comes to the equalization and a bit more fine-tune of the kick sound, I prepared here a reference track. That probably you will not hear through the stream, because on purpose, to avoid any problems with copyright, yes, I routed it to an external output, so I'm going to bypass the master. You will not hear the reference track, but it's still going to help me work on my own kick sound. So yes, in theory, reference tracks are used most often during the mixdown, and actually this should be something necessary to use, but I'm using a reference track a bit earlier on the sound design stage, so I can more quickly see if something is wrong with my kick drum on maybe even a fundamental level. Now when I compare my kick to the reference track here, that again you will not hear because I routed it especially through the external output, so I'm bypassing the master channel. The rumble sound and my kick sound still has quite a lot of high end that I want to cut. When it comes to cutting the high end, I think it would be best if I do that in the last equalizer that works with the rumble sound. Let me see if that's the right equalizer. Yes, it is. And it's best to start removing the high end. I will start with, well, a low pass filter. I will also check if using a high shelf filter will help with making this kick drum sound more dull. So let's check out these two filters now. As you could see by looking at the frequency spectrum, some of the high end is already cut off, because probably, yes, because of a low pass filter in the equalizer before saturator, but, well, after that equalizer I'm using a saturator effect, so the saturator, despite changing the sound of the rumble, could still add back some of the high end. That's why there might be a need to use a low pass filter for the second time. And still, the fact that I want to use a low pass filter doesn't mean that I want to make this rumble sound very dull and deep, as if it was, I don't know, a drum code style kick. Because since it's an industrial techno track, I still want to have some of the mids and just a bit of high end or mid-high frequencies on the kick drum to make the sound full enough. To get a bit more narrow filter curve, I purposefully layer two same low-pass filters on top, and this gives me a bit more curved filter shape than, well, a single low-pass filter like that. If instead of using two filters like that, I used just a single, a very narrow and very edgy low-pass filter, the high end of the kick drum would already sound a bit unnatural. There's some sort of that, I don't know, a wheezing sound that disappears if we use a less aggressive low-pass filter. The only downside is that, well, I have to use two cut-off knobs, just two cut-off knobs separately. The high end from the rumble is cut, and now let's equalize this sound more. I'm especially interested in the low end because, well, in the rumble we will have most of the low end. And again, in the reference track that I want to see now, the low end sounds just a bit deeper. So to see the spectrum a bit more accurately, I'm going to take the Vox & Co span. Yes, I could use as well the spectrum from Ableton, but with the span I can freeze the frequency spectrum so it's easier to see. That would be the kick from the reference. Let's use the same span on the kick drum. Okay, if I was to make my kick sound more similar to the reference one, I would say yes, I need to make more boost in the equalization in that frequency range at around 100 to 200 Hz, because in my kick sound there is a lack of these frequencies. But I'm also not trying to make my kick sound exactly like in the reference track. So probably I'm going to just make a small boost here to make the kick drum sound more rumbly. And this should give me the low end that sounds fuller. Because based on what do I see here, we already have quite a lot of sub-frequencies. I'm talking about the 60 Hz range. There are also some frequencies from the 80 Hz range, so boost in this frequency range is not going to help much with making the low end more full. What we need here is a bit more content in that frequency range at around 200. Coming back to the rumble sound, let's see if boost in anything here is going to sound well. Okay, I'm already going to say that this equalization here could not work as expected. Typically when you boost a low end in an equalizer, you would expect the kick to sound more well, deep, and with more, it would have more bass. But in the group processing, I have the amp effect and also a multiband compressor, so it might happen that instead of having more rumble, the kick can become, for example, more distorted. But here, when I'm trying to equalize the rumble sound more, well, it sounds like we can indeed squeeze even more rumble with low end boost. which is what I'm going to do now. I think this should be enough, and past, like maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, I had a bad habit of making a kick sound too muddy, and during equalization, I was boosting this frequency range too much. Now I'm a bit better in that. So I'm going to leave this filter as it is, right here. Under the mid frequencies in the rumble, I could make the sound just a bit cleaner. I will see what I can do if I sweep through the whole frequency range or the frequency spectrum with another bell filter. Okay, in this area, close to 1K, we are going to have just a bit of hollowness. Let's solo that sound so you can know what I'm talking about. This part of the rumble is a bit too loud for me, but instead of using a separate filter, which gives me more controls to adjust, I could probably, yes, use the Q parameters and low pass filters to make this frequency range quieter. That should give me the same result. Okay, let's compare before and after the sound. And that's how, instead of making a kick sounds more distorted or maybe rough, I'm aiming for making a kick to sound more deep. Let's see if anything else needs to be cut. And I guess I will make a small cut at 250 Hz. This will also make the kick drum sound a bit cleaner. So I was not sure if this is going to sound nice. So what I did a while ago was I was comparing the kick drum with and without such a cut to the kick drum from the reference track, and I was listening to how clean the reference track kick is in relation to my own kick sound. So now, because of that, I think I can make a cut, but a smaller one at around 250. Regarding the low end itself, I'm not going to boost 60 Hz range to make the kick sound even deeper. As we could see in the frequency spectrum a few minutes ago, my kick drum already has a lot of frequencies in that range. So probably it seems like I'm not going to boost anything more in this equalizer when it comes to the rumble sound. I can only check if, well, something needs to be cut in the low end range. I'm not talking about the 60 Hz frequency range, but between 60 Hz and 100 Hz there could be still something that I might be interested in cutting. Alright, nothing, I don't want to cut anything more. Let's see if something needs boosting as well. I'm going to sweep the rumble sound now with a bell filter that boosts the frequencies. Okay, I also don't think that I need to boost anything. So yes, the whole sound will change like that. That would make the rumble sound equalized. A second most important part of the kick. Well, let's see what we could equalize next. Okay, the next sound I will equalize more is the punch kick sound. So this is the part of the kick drum that gives me that transient and all the power in the beginning. Again, I'm going to have an equalizer for the punch sound here. What I did last week is I only boosted the 130 Hz range to make the kick more punchy. And in that kick sound, I guess I would like to make it maybe a bit more bright. I'm talking about the punch sound. We will want to boost some high ends. I'm not sure yet what about the mid frequencies. As always, I can check and compare my kick sound to the reference one. It's impossible to get good results if your monitoring system sucks. I've spent more than 10 years trying to create good kicks, but it always sounds bad when I change the playback device. So I guess the struggle is when you, for example, listen to your tracks through a car sound system, yes, or some other type of speakers. That can be, well, definitely frustrating. About the monitoring system, of course, a acoustically treated room with a proper pair of monitors will be a better way to mix the low end than a pair of headphones. But, well, without, for example, listening to your kicks or your tracks, well, I can't say much whether your kicks indeed sound bad, because I also want to take into account that we tend to be our, yes, biggest criticists. The only advice I could give right now is that maybe you can try to reference your mix and listen to your mix more often on various sound systems, whether it's a phone or laptop speaker, again, a car audio system. If you make these references a bit earlier, not only during the final mixdown, maybe, yes, it will be easier to correct some of the mistakes earlier. But yeah, again, we would have to discuss in what way your kick does sound bad. There will not be a one-size-fits answer to your struggle. Coming back to the kick sound. Once again, let's sweep through the frequency range with a bell filter that cuts everything to see what I'm going to clear in the kick sound, if that's of course necessary. There's a question: how can you make the LFO tool to gate the kick react to MIDI notes? So far I haven't been using either a LFO tool or a shaper in a way to react to the MIDI note. Usually I'm just adjusting the LFO in an appropriate way to just match the rhythm of the kick sound. If the LFO tool doesn't have any sort of one-shot setting, well, the only workaround I could think of is using an automation to manually turn on and off the effect. There are some effects like Tal Filter 2 plugin that has a feature to react to the MIDI notes, or it also maybe has a one-shot mode. Also, I'm not sure if the shaper in Live 12 has such a feature too. So if the LFO tool doesn't have that feature, you can always try to look for other plugins, whether it's a Tal Filter 2, you can also try Kickstarter by Nicky Romero, Shaper Box, and what else? There's one more plugin, but I forgot its name. Okay, in the mid frequencies, in this punch sound, we will have quite a lot of content. I want you to notice that if I try to make a cut at this frequency range, well, the kick drum suddenly loses its power and punch. So this frequency range is not something I would like to, well, cut. So So to keep the character of the kick drum, I will not make a cut here. Okay, it doesn't seem like I want to cut anything. Let's see what about boosting. I've mentioned I want this punch sound to be a bit brighter. So maybe at first let's try a high shelf filter for that. Okay, that seems to work, so I'm not sure if I'm not going to add even more of the gain, but I'm going to keep it just in this filter. We will keep the sound that way. I should have kept the distorted reverb on, yes, to make the kick sound full enough. Okay, let's run through the frequency spectrum again with a cell filter to boost something if that's going to be necessary. If not, there will be nothing more to equalize in the punch sound. We will move on to the distorted reverb layer, and then the last equalizer will be the final one here in the group processing. Yes, probably the first hour of the stream is going to be all about equalization. Then we will check all the distortion settings of the kick drum, and when I'm going to start working on some other elements of the track. Okay, I like the way I can add more character to the beginning of the kick drum by making a boost somewhere in the mid frequencies here. We are going to make the sound a bit more resonating on purpose. This goes against the reference track I've just picked, but don't worry about that. When I will be making a final mixdown of the track, I might pick a different reference track, or yes, I might readjust this equalizer. For now, I like the way how I can add more character to the punch here. So let's do that with an equalizer. yes, that's how I add more character to the kick. One last sweep with another filter. Is going to tell me that nothing more has to be equalized here in the punch sound. What is left is the distorted reverb part of the kick. That sounds like this. So it's just a sidechained part of the kick drum that adds more texture to it. Indeed, it's made by reverb in the kick drum and then again distorting it. The equalizer here is already quite complex. I have already added a week ago some filters, so hopefully there isn't going to be much of a work needed here. So at first I'm going to check if all the filters I adjusted a week ago don't have to be readjusted, whether they sound cool or not. Nothing seems out of place. What about either making a boost somewhere here or there? It's not going to sound well. What about making a cut? Okay. Probably the difference in the sound here is going to be subtle. But what I want to show you is that while we would like the rumble sound to take a bit more of the frequencies from around 200 Hz range, as you could see, the rumble sound itself is equalized in a way that we boost the frequencies from 255 range. There is a cut in 250, but a slight one. So while here we want to have quite a lot of these low mid frequencies, in the distorted reverb sound, there are going to be much less of these frequencies. And on top of that, I'm going to make another cut here. Or actually, maybe instead of adding a new filter like that, I'm going to again work with the Q value of the high pass filter, which should give me similar results. Or maybe not, I'm going to use a separate filter. I feel that it's going to sound better. Yes, M40X are entry-level headphones, so what I have heard on the internet is that they indeed have a decent low-end response. If we consider that we need from headphones for techno production a decent low-end, M40X would be something to consider, especially if you are just starting out. 770 by Bayer Dynamics are also fine. They are going to sound much warmer than the headphones I have. That is AKG K702. Okay, I want to show you now the difference in how clean the sound becomes when I make another cuts in the distorted reverb sound. That is at 200 Hz range. I'm going to see if I can fit one more filter here. Okay, and to keep making the kick drum sound more deep, what I can do in the distorted reverb is I could make a similar cut at around 700 Hz. I believe it's something I did as well in the rumble sound equalization here. So again, I'm getting rid of the mid frequencies that could give me a hollow sound, and because there are less mid frequencies in the kick, the lower frequencies are going to be more emphasized. So we are making the kick sound deeper not by boosting the low ends of the kick drum, but by cutting the mid frequencies out of it. That will also end the equalization of the distorted rumble, distorted reverb sound. What is left is equalizing the main the kick sound at the very end after a multiband compressor. I believe we did most of the work in the last session, last Sunday. So let's see if anything here needs to be either changed, added, or I don't know, improved. I will give just one more listen to the reference track. Okay, nothing out of order. The only thing I changed in relation to the last week was I cut this hollow sound even more by adding more attenuation. Now, regarding the remaining filters, let's see if something here needs to be again boosted or cut. While making this boost at the mid frequencies again sounds more interesting because it adds character to the kick drum. I'm not sure if that, well, should be added. Definitely if I keep this boost static, the rumble sound is going to have too many mid frequencies and the whole kick is going to sound, well, dull and hollow. But I'm going to experiment and try something. I'm going to add the shaper to automate just this equalizer filter, equalizer band. So we could make it remind a bit of a dynamic equalizer, but the only similarity would be that, yes, some equalization is just automated. Okay, now if I quickly show you the difference before and after automating this equalizer. It could make the kick sound a bit more full. I'm going to experiment with that a bit more. But again, if I keep this equalization static, meaning that it's not going to move, but I will keep the boost fixed, the whole kick sounds too hollow. Now, aside from by how many decibels I'm boosting this frequency range, what is the frequency range I want to boost and what is the width of the filter? I also have to consider the modulation curve, so the rhythm of that equalization. If we were using a dynamic equalizer, we would have to adjust settings typical for a compressor effect, that is threshold, ratio, attack and release. Here, because I'm using a shaper, we could say that this is substituted with, well, a curve I'm going to create now. will keep the modulation work like that. Now the last thing is to adjust the amount of boost. I can't touch the gain knob because it's taken by the shaper, so the only way I can give the sound more or less equalization is by changing the modulation range. Okay, I'm not 100% sure if I'm going to keep that until the end of, well, my track production. For now it sounds cool, I'm going to keep it. I will see if anything here needs to be boosted again or maybe cut. No more boosts. And it seems like I don't want to cut anything more. What about using a shelf filter? No, it's going to also not going to change anything. Okay, so the whole kick is every element of the kick drum is already equalized. I'm going to also keep that shaper and equalization combo. What I will do now is I want to go through the distortion settings once again and the sound design part of the kick drum. One of the reasons could be that I can fine-tune the kick sound more. So I can discover that now with all the processing added, well, the kick could sound even more if I add more saturation on one of the kick elements. But also another reason for why I want to go through the kick drum processing once again is that maybe I will find a way to automate more of the kick drum settings or to automate more effects, and this could give me, for example, some kick drum variations I could use later during the arrangement. Let's see. So a quick example of what I'm talking about is the distortion settings. I quickly grabbed the pedal from the punch, and when I tweak knobs, I noticed that when I turn the gain, so the amount of distortion, to 0, the kick lacks that punch, but we have everything else aside, well, from that punch. If I wanted to play a kick drum like that in the breakdown, if I wanted the kick drum in the breakdown to be less aggressive, instead of, for example, low pass in a kick drum, or instead of creating another kick sound, I can use an automation and turn the gain to 0 while the breakdown and the track is playing, and in that way I will be creating some other versions of the same kick drum. So that's why I will now go through the processing of the kick sound once again, maybe including, yes, the transpose control. So the pitch of the kick sample I picked in the beginning. I'm also checking the volume of each kick drum element. I think that's, well, because of the way I cut so many frequencies in the distorted reverb sound. This distorted reverb is not that audible anymore in the kick sound, so I might be interested in turning up the gain knob in the utility that comes after the equalizer. Or maybe it's going to sound indeed better if I keep the kick drum silent like that. I found another interesting thing. I have a punch sound with an equalizer that is before distortion effects. Last week I used an equalizer before distortion to shape the sound of the distortion itself, so if I make any more changes to the equalization here, I can completely change the sound of the kick drum. I like the way that making a cut here changes the transient and the attack of the kick sound. So I can adjust a filter like that and later throughout the track automate it, or let's say turn on and off this equalizer band to create a different version of the same kick drum. I'm doing all of this so I can have the arrangement sound more interesting. Actually, the kick sounds so cool in that way, so I'm not sure if I'm not going to, well, just keep this filter like that. But anyways, thanks to that filter, I can have two different kick sounds. In case I don't want to forget about this, so I'm going to write down in the channel description that here I have an EQ filter that I could automate to make a kick and the arrangement sound more interesting. I just went through all the settings of the kick drum I made already a week ago, but also today. Through changing the equalization settings on the punch sound, I can get a single variation of the kick sound. Let's see if I could make another similar kick sound that I could also use during the arrangement. Well, for example, what could LS41 do is they could add even more distortion onto the kick sound. So let's try that as well. We already have a amp added on the group processing. Let's see how the kick sound would change if I try to add something more to the kick sound. So again, I would like to try a few of distortion effects. We will also want to see if we want to have that extra distortion to be before or after the amp that is now here hidden in the group. Both saturator and redux doesn't seem to sound very interesting. Let's keep forward. Okay, it doesn't seem like I can fit more distortion to the kick sound, and nothing sounded too interesting, which means that I would say the kick drum is finished, so I can move on to making another sound. I think I would like to experiment today with creating either noise or making pads by, again, using a reverb and exporting the reverb onto another channel. What I especially like to do is I like to resample sounds I have already created. So let's see what I could what I could create out of the kick sounds I already have here. What we want to export to play around with is, well, individual kick drum sounds, starting with the rumble sound. This is the first thing I'm going to later freeze and flatten. The second thing is the punch part of the kick sound. The third one is the distorted reverb. Okay, all these three sounds now will be frozen and flattened. So I have 3 individual sounds. Yes, let's also consolidate them. And now there should be a way to throw everything together inside another drum rack channel. Yes, I was thinking of making a pad sound, so let's create another channel like that. Let's find everything in the browser. This was a rumble part of the kick. This is going to be the punch of the kick. The last sound we frozen was the exported distorted reverb. Okay, I can delete the channels I have had earlier. Now, if I want to make a pad sound out of a very short sound, because for example the punch sound of the kick here is short, I have 2 ways to create a pad out of it. I can either extremely pitch down the sample without using warping, but because this mostly fills the sound with more low frequencies, maybe a better approach would be to use a reverb effect and freeze the reverb infinitely, and then the frozen reverb is something I can render and export onto another channel, and this will finally become a new pad sound. I have a YouTube tutorial on that. I think it's called some sort of a cinematic hard techno pad sound design, where I make use of the exact same technique. Okay, but at first let's play with resampling. Maybe I will find something interesting among the sounds I already have here. Okay, well, this one might not sound like a pad sound. I can already imagine it's going to be an interesting one-shot effect. It's already synced into rhythm. Well, maybe aside from just a bit of reverb and some chorus or whatever else, maybe there is not going to be much of things to do here. Let's keep that aside. What about the punch sound? What if I decide to... Now on punch sound I wanted to use a reverb, so we can only play around with the rumble. By just playing around with warping and changing the pitch of the sample, only playing around with the distorted reverb sound turned out to be interesting enough. The sound is also reversed, but later if we would be working on the sound I could chop it further. But regarding these 2 sounds, to make them a bit more interesting, I would have to use a reverb here. I already want, yes, again, out of habit, I'm using a reverb in parallel processing mode, but as usual, I mean not as usual, but to create more interesting textures for my future pad sound, I want to use a hybrid reverb effect instead. Ah yes, unfortunately I can use only the algorithmical part of the reverb, because only here, only then I can use the freeze feature. And that's what I'm going to experiment with now to create a bit more interesting pad sound. Probably I would like to have something that is, yes, pitched higher, that it feels more high-end. So let's try pitching up the rumble sound. Okay, this is what I could get from the rumble sound. What I can get from the punch one. While a sound like that sounds promising, it's just a bit too simple, at least for me. But, well, at first let's figure out how the reverb should be adjusted. Let's figure out how we will pitch up or down this kick sound. At first I will play with the sample only. Once I figure out what part of the punch sound I want to reverb, what is the pitch and what are the reverb settings, then what we will do is I will freeze and render this reverb as a pad sound, and further I will resample the pad by adding even more effects, but I'm going to add these effects after exporting the reverb. To have a better idea on how the pad will fit the kick drum I've just made, I can play the kick drum in the background, but I can turn its volume very low. Probably reversing the sample is not going to change anything. No, it will not. So the sample is prepared. We cut the beginning of it to give the reverb a slightly different texture and sound. Now it's on to adjust in the hybrid reverb settings. Actually, if the dry width is at 100% and I don't want to play a dry sound, I will get rid of that audio effect track. And let's move the hybrid reverb to the inside of the pad channel. Okay, what I did now is I turned down the diffusion down to 0. It makes any reverb sound more like a series of echo. So we can hear that we have some sort of a tremolo effect. This sounds very cool and I maybe would like to use it as another sound in my track. So because this sounds it sounds like it has some potential, I'm going to keep it as another sound here. And I will return to readjust in the hybrid reverb to give myself a decent pad sound. Okay, that makes the whole reverb adjusted. I don't care about the decay, that is the reverb lengths, because we will be using the freeze feature anyways, so the length of the reverb will be, well, infinite. But all the remaining parameters, that is the size, the amount of high end, so the damping, everything like that is adjusted. Now I just have to remind myself on how to record the reverb output. I suppose we want to select the route in here to input. We have to arm a record this channel and we want to route the output of the pad channel to the pad export. Okay. And to record the reverb, I have to quickly hit records. Is there any? Yes, there is a shortcut for that. I have to click both record and freeze. Eight bars sound long enough for me. This is the reverb. After exporting, it was just the first take of the exported reverb. The reverb could sound slightly different depending on in which moment I hit the freeze control. So I'm going to record a few takes like that. Now I pressed the freeze at the very end of the reverb, so that's why the exported pad has more high end, it's a bit less full. Now let's try to hit the freeze immediately once I press the record button. I have 3 different recordings of the same pad sound, so we can reroute everything back to default. That is the first take. That's the second one. And the third. Export. I'm going to choose either the first or the third recording. I'm going to play the kick drum quickly to see how it's going to sound like. And I will end up with using this recording. That sounded most full. Let's hide the drum rack away because I want to keep working on the pad sound. I don't need the beginning of this recording where the reverb was not that static. So we will play this from a different part. And now if I wanted to play this pad for a bit longer, well, no, maybe before I think of that, I will sound design this pad a bit more. I've mentioned that I wanted to both export the reverb onto a new channel, which is something I already did. The second thing I wanted to do was to resample the sound further. So I'm going to again try using the warpen section, now inside of the audio editor. So let's see how it's going to sound like. Maybe I will make the kick drum a bit louder. The kick drum, not the reference. Okay. With the texture warping mode, I can add some interesting extra flavor to the pad. If we did use something else, which I will show you in just a second, with the warping like that, we will get this extra modulation into the pad. Whoop. Which sounds just a bit like a comp filter, but without it, if we picked something different, the sound will be more static. So that's why it's useful to play around with different warping modes. We can already change the sound a bit without, well, adding the effects. In the warping section, we will not do anything more. What I'm thinking of this pad is maybe, I don't want to say annoying, but it is very resonating. I'm thinking of maybe adding some sort of a tremolo effect. That's what I could do in the very beginning. But I also have other things to try when it comes to, for example, the pitch. We can also try using a frequency shifter, which will pitch up or down the sound in a more unnatural way. And this will sound, again, completely different than the warping mode and the transpose feature in the audio editor. Well, if I was that interested, I could also automate this chord control to make a bit interesting sound, but I think I would like to have something more static. And that's how the frequency shifter sounds like if we keep the tri-wet at 100%. If I set it to 50% and play around with detuning the pads, I'm going to make it sound as if a phaser was used. So this sort of a modulation probably is not going to fit well the kind of sound I'm going for. But on its own, it's still an interesting effect. Yeah, some sort of a tremolo is something I will add, but just a bit later. I wanted to focus on pitching the sound up or down further with the frequency shifter. Let's try that again. It's not going to sound that interesting. Out of the effects that could change the sound significantly. Let's see what else I could try to use. Yeah, of course, in meanwhile, don't hesitate to ask any questions during the chat. I didn't ask anything like that, but yeah, if there is something you would like to get explained or whatever, I'm reading the messages on the chat. Regarding adding the texture, we can also quickly try around the corpus. That is the effect that adds some resonating object to the pad sound. So the corpus doesn't sound that well. Let's see the chorus and phaser and flanger. Probably distortion is not going to sound well, so I might try to use a maybe redux and overdrive. The delay will not be that useful. Okay, the chorus doesn't sound very appealing to me too. Same goes for the flanger. For the redux as well. And the overdrive doesn't sound that well too. Okay. There's one more thing that I can think of to make this pad sounds different. We could make a copy of this channel and pitch it up or down to layer it. So it's as if we were playing a chord in a synthesizer sound. In that way, I end up with the same sound playing at two different pitches. The first exported pad was transposed by 12 semitones. This one is pitched down by a whole octave. If we play them together, we end up with the sound being more interested. Well, to make these sounds, maybe to glue these both pad layers more, I could also think of using a low and high pass filters to cut an excess of frequencies from both pad elements. Let's see what we can do with the EQ8 again. We got lots of low end from the part of the pad that was pitched down. And maybe on the other pad element I will use a low pass filter. This would be another way to change the pad sound, to keep creating something new. So in the beginning we had, yes, a single pad sound like that was without any filtering applied. It filled a lot of high end. It was also, let's say, a bit annoying. But I thought of making the pad sound fuller. What I tried before was using effects like chorus or shifter. But I ended up with duplicating the pad channel by pitching the other pad by 2 octaves in relation to the first pad sound. And now through a series of EQ filters, we are creating a new pad sound. So let's adjust these filters more precisely. Now onto the other pad sound. At first a low pass filter. I will make sure that I don't want to use the most aggressive low pass filter here. The filtering is finished. Now I will adjust the volume levels of these two pad elements, and later we will experiment with adding a tremolo effect or just a volume automation, something that I wanted to do right from the beginning, so that's why I have a shaper and utility group in this, well, pad group. That sounds fine. And now I will adjust that rhythmic gate effect. So I have to map the shaper to the utility again. Maybe let's set a faster tempo. And yes, I will play with that shaper for a while to get an interesting rhythm for the volume automation. Now what is left is to adjust the volume modulation range. Maybe we will emphasize a bit that volume modulation, so we will turn that down. I will also, before I forget, I will make this pad sound more narrow. The reverb we exported was very wide. So to fit that sound better, we will turn down the width control, and back to the volume automation. And I think that I will automate the rate a bit. At some moment of the beat, maybe I would like to make this modulation even twice as fast. Let's create an automation for that. Okay, not only I would like to have this automation faster here, but maybe I would also want to have a different modulation curve. So there is a need for me to create a similar shaper and utility group with a different modulation. Now we have to automate these two shaper effects, that is say on and off switch. So we will get two different rhythms. I will also name them appropriately. What did we want to get is during the whole beat, we have the ramp, the first volume automation. Variable like that. But the other one was supposed to have a different automation curve. Something like that. Previously, what I was playing around with too is the shifter with the dry wet turned down to 50% to create some sort of a phaser-like effect. It's still not going to sound that interesting. So, to make that pad sound a bit more alive, well, maybe some distortion would be useful. This pad is maybe a bit too smooth, too soft for this kick drum. Let's try to make it more alive, but again, I'm not exactly sure what we should try, so it's best to check everything again. But probably I will be interested most with erosion or redux, because these are the effects that add a decent amount of crunch and noise without changing the sound itself that much. But also the dynamic tube could be interesting. Okay, while the Redux alone doesn't sound very interesting or appealing to the sound, I could think of, well, attaching the same automation to the tri-wet control of the Redux effect. Again, I'm experimenting here. Let's see how that is going to sound like. Whether there's a large difference between automating a tri-wet knob in the Redux versus having this constantly turned on. Okay, this doesn't seem to sound well. But with different settings of the Redux, when I turn up the jitter to 100%, I can add more noise to the pad, which already sounds more promising. So let's keep the Redux like that. And let's also try the other effects, like the amp. I will already pair it up with the utility because I know that amp likes to add a lot of decibels at the output. Nothing interesting here. And I'm going to stay with the Redux. At first, let it be the only effect. With these settings, I will fine-tune them to keep the pad more noisy. And let's adjust the Redux in while having the kick drum playing in the background, so again we fit the sound better. The Redux is all set up. I have another idea for automation. Maybe in the parts where I have a different rhythm, That's when I would like to have the redux be inaudible. But here we will keep the redux turned off. So let's create another modulation. That sounds well, but what about the parts of the pad that have the redux turned off? After all, in the beginning I was thinking of adding the redux to make the pad sound brighter. So while the redux is turned on, and that happens only when I have a different rhythm in the volume modulation effect, the sounds descend. But on the remaining part of the pad, again, that pad sounds dull without any high end. Well, if I want to boost the high frequencies in a very transparent way, the best way would be to use an equalizer. Guess what? The equalizer will be also automated. To be more precise, I will automate just a high shelf filter. So we will make the pad sound brighter in that way. And as I've said, I wanted to automate this filter too. So now this shelf filter will be turned off whenever we have the redux turned on. This should give us a bright pad sound in both parts of the pad. Eight decibels should be enough for that pad sound. If we listen to the whole thing now, I'm afraid we are hearing a difference in the volume. This part is quieter, but here, because of an equalizer used, the whole sound is, well, louder. Let's make use of the... yes, we want to use the gain knob here in the EQ to counter that difference in volume. But then it means I have to turn on and off the whole equalizer instead of just a single filter in the EQ plugin. I have to recreate this automation curve for the on and off switch, and we will get rid of the automation here. And now I can use the gain knob to turn down the volume of the pad after equalization. And I'm going to keep adjusting the gain, that is the output of this equalizer, until the part of the pad with equalizer and the part of the pad with the redux are equally loud. Definitely what does the sound lack is the reverb. We have all these volume automations added, but it's when the Redux is played, so here, that's where especially here, the pad is too dry. So far in the very end of all that processing, we can add the another reverb effect. This time a parallel processing is going to be useful, because there is no need to export this reverb later onto another sound. I think I will adjust the reverb settings when the Redux effect is turned on, because then the reverb should be more audible. Again, I will think of whether I want to use, well, the convolution engine or the algorithmical part of the reverb. In other words, the whole hybrid reverb effect has to be now adjusted and later preferably equalized too. But again, I will add the kick drum along. If I were to use the algorithmical part of the reverb, the quartz algorithm sounds best. Let's see the convolution part of the hybrid reverb effect. The early reflections will not work well. What about the real places? This type of reverb sounds interesting. I'm going to stick to that and adjust it more accurately. I will not be using the algorithmical part of the reverb because there's no need to make all of these things more complex. I've already changed the sound of the kick drum a lot to make this bad sound. So it leaves us with only maybe 5 or 6 controls to adjust to fine-tune the pad sound, or rather the reverb sound in the pad. The reverb could be short to not wash out the whole sound. With all of these bit crusher effects on or other elements, well, the reverb should not be that long in my opinion. We just don't want the reverb we just want to make the pad sound less dry, and that's the only reason for why I'm using the reverb. I'm not using it to make the sound more interesting. The pad is already interesting on its own. So that's another reason for why we will set the reverb of the length of the reverb to around 2 seconds. The feedback control can be quite interesting. I use it rarely, but we can use the feedback to make the reverb ring in more, to make the reverb more pronounced. Here, if I use the feedback, I can add even more high end to the reverb. So just a bit of feedback like that will not hurt. I've played around with the pre-delay as well to add more rhythm to the pad sound, so the reverb fades in just a bit later than, I mean, the reverb is playing in a slightly different rhythm than the sound coming from the shaper and utility combination. What is left here is to make this reverb a bit more narrow. We will see if degrading it is going to make sense. Later we will adjust the volume of it and maybe think of equalizing both pad sounds. I mean, both pad elements, yes, the reverb and the dry sound as well. This actually makes me mix the track a bit along when I sound design it. So it's up to one personal preference whether you want to mix the track while you are arranging it or making a sound design, or whether you want to keep the mix down of the track as a totally separate part of the track production. Personally speaking, I find equalization to be very tiresome. There are always so many things to adjust. I spend most of the time equalizing, and if I was to do all the equalization in a single stage of music production, I would be exhausted. For me, it's better to equalize things more often, but to spend less time on the equalization. So that's the reason for why, even though I'm still designing the sounds, I'm already trying to make the sound as equalized as I can. So later, during the final mixdown, I'm not going to have that much of work. Let's adjust the volume of the dry pad sound in relation to the kick, and then we will adjust the volume of the reverb in relation to both dry pad sound and the kick drum. And for that I will use a separate utility. Of course, because I want to leave these faders for automations if I will want to automate the volume levels while arranging the track. Okay, now I'm adding the reverb. Now what do I think of the reverb? When the Redux is playing, the reverb sounds great, it's loud enough. It fills the sound in a decent way, but when I have just the pad with the volume modulation, now because of the reverb I can't hear that volume modulation that well. If I turn off the reverb, this volume automation and rhythm is hearable much better. I guess that makes another thing to automate, and what we will automate now is the volume of the reverb. So whenever we have the Redux playing, the reverb will be as loud as I've just adjusted, but everywhere else we will make the reverb quieter. Quiet enough so I still hear that volume automation. Minus 12.6 decibels, that's the volume of the reverb whenever the Redux effect is not audible. Now let's copy this automation whenever I need. Okay, this looks fine. And the whole pad with automated volume of the reverb is going to sound simply cleaner. I don't know if there's a need to make this pad sounds even more interesting. Let's see what I could try. Maybe a delay at the part with the Redux could be interesting. So I'm going to drag an echo over. What about other effects? No, I don't want to add any glitching with the beat repeat. There's also a filter delay, grain delay, spectral time. I don't have much experience with spectral time. We tried to use distortion before. Nothing seemed to work well. Just out of curiosity, we will try to use an OTT compression on the pad to bring out the high frequencies to make them sound even more compressed. I don't know how it's going to sound like, but maybe it will be something interesting. The equalizer is something I'm going to use at the very end, of course. We didn't try a vocoder yet. Let's see if it will be interesting to try to add even more noise into the pad. while adding more noise is something that I want to do, I think I will create a separate noise sound later, because I guess I would like to make this noise sound distorted, and using the vocoder to add more noise onto the pad itself is not something I want to try. But I've mentioned using the delay effect, and I want to use the delay only to create an echo for that part of the pad with the bit crusher added. I'm not sure yet if that's going to sound well, so let's try it. It sounds okay. I want to use the delay too. It's, again, I prefer to use it on a parallel processing chain. So let's just add a delay in the same audio effect track. A small tip when using an echo, when you are adjusting the delay settings, and let's say you want to reset the sound of the delay, simply turn on and off the whole effect. So you don't have to wait until all the echo repetitions fade away on their own. Okay, this delay time should sound okay. Probably I will not be interested in using different delay times for the left and right channel, as I will add unnecessarily some extra stereo width. Which I think would make the sound too complex, so I will keep the same delay time for both left and right channel. So what is left is to adjust the type of the delay, the amount of the number of echo repetitions. I'm not going to add any more delay because any more reverb. There's after all a separate reverb effect here. Usually the modulation tab in the echo effect, well, doesn't sound very good. Neither the character. I've never seen anyone using either of these. So there is a high chance that aside from just applying a echo, we will only high pass or just filter out the delay. But at first, let's say how long the delay has to be. Probably I will be interested in something shorter. Something like that. Again, ping pong delay is not interesting. Let's also make this delay more narrow. In the modulation tab, we could automate or just modulate delay times or the filter itself. Both doesn't sound interesting for me. And well, again, I didn't ever use the character tab of the echo effect. The effects there are simply uninteresting. Alright, let's see if we could filter out something from that delay. I know there is a filter section here in the echo, but because the delay itself will be something I will want to equalize later anyways, I prefer to use again the filters from the EQ8. It will probably sound better if we make an aggressive cut here. So let's keep a high pass filter like that. Now onto the low pass one. I want to cut the high end, but just sadly to not have that much of noise. So the delay will be still quite bright. That's at least what I intend to do. Again, let's check out different filter types. And we will stay with this one. So the delay is filtered out, but I'm not going to equalize the sound yet. And what is left? We need to adjust the volume of that delay sound, but also I wonder how to adjust it so we hear the delay. I mean, yes, I wouldn't like this part of the sound to be passed through the delay. So it would make sense to try to turn off the echo at this moment, but then probably I will not hear any delay coming from the part of the pad where I added redux. And that makes using the delay pointless. Maybe I'm just going to automate the volume of the delay so it fades away quite quickly. But it's weird that when I turn off the delay repetitions also fade away. Now the same applies to the normal delay effect, so it's not just a case of a plugin. Let's see how the volume automation is going to sound like. I make the delay to fade out very quickly. It still doesn't sound that okay for me. Well, it's going to be a bit complicated, but I think I would like to export this delay as a separate sound, and we will add it back to the pad. Well, the pad sound is slowly getting very, very complex. But okay, we will manage that. Let's see. There's still some volume automation on the delay I wanted to get rid of. If I want to add the delay only when the part with the Redux is playing, we have to turn off these clips. And export this sound. We will not be changing the feedback, nor neither the rhythm of the delay. So let's freeze and flatten the sound like that. But I can't. No, I have to. Again, record once again the pad sound, because I can't freeze or flatten the group of instruments, unfortunately. So once again, we set the different routing. The pad delay export is where I want to route the sound. Here I select the setting to in. We add arm recording. And the delay is now exported. And this is something I will throw into the pads group. Let's give it the same color. Turn back these clips on. Shit, what was the color of that? Oh, it was right here. There is still another problem with the routing like that. Because the pad delay is in the pad group here, we will still going to get the delay effects passed through the delay again. So preferably we have to move it outside. And group everything once again, but here we will have the sound like that. But why this pad sounds weird right now? It's as if I got rid of the utility here that was adjusting the volume of it. Oh shit. It means I will have to automate everything again. Okay, I have to get back the utility where I was automating the volume of the reverb, because I wouldn't like to get through that again. So let's hope that if I hit the Control Z long enough, I will get that automation back. Here it is. So now I'm going to copy that channel, open the version we ended up with. Let's hope I didn't mess anything up. Yes, here we have the pad delay. I want to paste that previous group where I had the utility. And I want to paste that utility here. Okay, everything is saved. Let's synchronize that delay to the beat. Let's add it properly. The screen is here so small. Maybe let's hide that. And also try to fit everything inside it. And I wanted to add only the delay part of it. And in that way the delay is fit into the pad. I will make sure the remaining processing is okay. If I want to adjust anything more, I will have to do that in the first group, the pad group. Now I adjusted the volume of the delay. Everything sounds like it fits together. Let's paste that delay also here, so we can listen to this whole pad sound right now with the kick drum. The rhythm is different because I looped 3 bars instead of 4. That sounds okay. I wanted also to filter out the delay. So I want to cut the equalizer I had before and paste it on the exported delay sound. Which will make me again to adjust the volume of the delay itself. Actually, I could think of making the delay on purpose louder than the other elements of the pad, so again the sound will be modulated and, well, more interesting. Which will make the pad sound decent enough. Let's try to make this pad even more, maybe not aggressive but bright. I was suggesting using a ODD compression on the pad, so I want to compress the high frequencies more aggressively than the mid ones. Since I know that there is no need to compress the low frequencies, I will not need low frequencies in that pad sound. I can turn off one of the compressors immediately. As usual, I will turn off the softening and peak. I feel like it's giving me more control over the compression because then the compression sounds more aggressive instead of more smooth. We want to work only with the high end. And that's the part of the pad I would like to compress. I'm adding 10 decibels of gain reduction, so the difference should be significant enough if we enable back the mid frequencies as well and listen to the sound of the pad. Let's see how compressing the high end is going to sound like. I'm not that sure if that sounds okay. Let me play it along with the kick drum. Nah, it makes the pad sound more alive, especially when the delay is present. When we play the delay part of the pad, that's when the multiband compression works best, or pushes the high frequencies up front most. So let's work on that part of the pad, and I will adjust the multiband compressor here. We have already decent amount of compression added, maybe let's add just a bit more. And as usual, I will at first work with the attack and release parameters. This will control the rhythm of the compression. Our pad sound doesn't have any transients, so I don't have to compress this pad sound as if I was compressing a kick drum. So I can think of just telling the rhythm of the compression by using both attack and release. There is no transient to preserve. There is no Yeah, there is no transient to preserve. So I will go with my feeling when it comes to both attack and release. Let's say I would like the compressor to work like that. And so far, if we turn on and off the high-end compressor, the sound changes in that way. I didn't adjust yet the crossover filter, so I can route more or less frequencies to that high-end compressor. Let's try that as well. And now onto the amount of compression I could make the sound more or less compressed. That of course will depend on both the attack and ratio. Let's turn on and off the high-end compressor to see if the pad has to be more or less compressed. I would try to compress the high end even more, but I'm not sure how it's that going to sound like, so let's create a copy of multiband dynamics with a bit different settings, and in the compressor to the right we will add more of that compression. And here we will have less compression. So now I can quickly compare what settings should be added in the compressor effect. Okay, here I have a bit too much of the compression. Let's reduce the amount of it. I will keep reducing the amount of compression still by turning the ratio closer to 1. That sounds okay. I will see if adding a bit less of compression is going to sound better. So I'm still trying to find the best value of the ratio, so the right amount of compression. And how do I adjust the outputs knob? I simply look at the gain reduction meter and try to see by how many decibels the volume of the high frequencies is reduced most. So if I see here minus 11.6 decibels, I type in the output the same value. Okay. Let's try once more a different ratio. And in the end I will leave the compressor set up like that. At first we adjust the D-attack and release for rhythm. A crossover filter makes sure we are compressing the right amount of high end. This is exactly what I'm compressing. And in the end, yes, we adjust the output level, but also the amount of compression added to more or less tell by how much we make the sound flatter. Why do I compress only the high frequencies instead of using a limiter or a glue compressor that would compress the whole sound? I think that if I compressed all the frequencies in the pad sound, we could make the pad sound that already sounds too muddy and bloated. Some time ago, I was adjusting the volume of the reverb. That was the moment when we have been automating the volume of the reverb. Here I had the utility, I automated the volume. When I didn't make that part of the pad quieter, I'm talking about the reverb, the pad sounded to me too washed out and too flat. So if the reverb was louder at this moment, the pad would be too bloated for me. And the reverb has both mid and high frequencies. So in other words, making a reverb louder would give me a similar effect to using a limiter on the whole pad sound, because by turning up the volume of the reverb I would not only make the higher frequencies of the reverb louder, but also the mid ones. So because I wanted to make only the high frequencies louder, that's why I used a multiband dynamics. Of course, that's not only the only reason for using a multiband dynamics, because through that effect I'm not only making the high end louder, I'm also making them sound flatter, because after all, if I just wanted the high end to be only louder, I could just use, once again, a high shelf filter. Okay, here in the EQ, in the group where I equalize the whole pad, for now I will only add a high pass filter to not have any problems with low end overlap, because I noticed that here, when I have the redux plane on the pad sound also has some low end that I want to get rid of. Alright, and in the next session I will be equalizing this pad more, readjusting a bit some of the settings, but today in the very end I would be interested in arranging a bit more interesting pattern for the kick drum. When we were ending up designing the kick drum, I remember that I could change the transient of the kick drum by automating this equalizer curve. To create a more interesting kick drum pattern, that's not the only thing I'm going to try. I will be also interested in maybe well, what else I could try. Maybe soloing or turning on different parts of the kick drum. Let's see. At first, if I want to just change the kick drum, I need the pattern to be longer. Somewhat like that. What would be typical for me is to try to create a glitching effect for the kick drum, to create a moment in the track where we have that kick drum played very, very often. I can't play this kick drum any longer, probably because of this shaper here. So let's also automate that. Yeah, and in theory what could be simpler is to just export this part of the kick drum and use it as a separate sound. But I don't know, it feels like I'm having more control over the project if I don't use, say, an exported sound, but of course, unfortunately, it makes things much more complicated. Okay, let's see the automation of the shaper effect. So here, when I want this glitching effect to be present, I will turn off the shaper. So we can keep playing around with the pattern. And here, maybe let's try triplets. Or maybe not. Alright, that sounds promising. And this sort of glitching reasons, that sort of a glitch on the kick drum is not something I want to use often, because that would be very distracting. So these two remaining bars are going to have the pattern we began with. Let's add the rumble sound back. Ah yes, the rumble is turned off in the MIDI clip. Okay. Yes, can we listen now to that pattern? Now everything should be okay. Unfortunately, I can hear the low end overlapping coming from the punch sound here. Maybe a simple way to fix that would be to not play the rumble at these moments. This will also make the beat a bit more interesting because sometimes the low end disappears. I guess I will keep the rumble here. But to avoid any low end overlap, I'm going to, well, add a high pass filter somewhere. Oh my god. Somewhere in the end. We have to just create another automation, yes. And here now I will only have to adjust an extra high pass filter to not make the low end coming from the rumble overlap with the low end from the punch sound that is being played repeatedly. If the punch sound is playing in that normal 4-4 pattern, there is no problem with the low ends overlapping. That is because the rumble itself, oh, I thought it's sidechained. It is a bit sidechained maybe because that's what I can see in the volume envelope, but yeah, never mind. Nevertheless, still I can hear problems with the low end when the kick drum is being repeated, so that's why I will use a separate high pass filter. And that makes the whole pattern sound kind of okay. What is left? Yes, I also had that thing to automate. Maybe we can also create the same automation for that. For these parts of the kick. So in the end, what is happening here is I'm making the kick pattern more interesting by playing only the punch part of the kick, so the kick without the rumble, here in such a fast and repetitive pattern. But to avoid any problems with the low end, whenever I have that kick drum being glitched, I also have a separate high pass filter turned on. That is here. On top, I'm combining that with automating the equalization that precedes distortion, so I'm getting a slightly different kick drum sound. Very simple, right? But in the end, the whole kick drum pattern with the pad can sound like this. Where's the rumble? And that would be everything for today. And next Sunday, probably, I could start adding the percussion and some of that noise I wanted to add. Don't forget that we also have the something that I could create a one-shot from. I wonder how it's that going to sound like somewhere in the beat. Well, it still would be worth exploring, but not today because the stream is already 3 hours long. Okay, let me know if there are any questions before we end this stream. Maybe in the meanwhile I will keep playing the same pattern for that minute or two, as every producer does. Yes, it's normal to keep playing a very short part of your track infinitely instead of just finishing the project. But if there are no any questions, probably we will see. Probably I will keep working on the track on the next Sunday, and of course the stream will be later available. It will not disappear from the channel. So that's everything for today. I could see that, well, there were a few people that maybe were watching the whole stream. I'm not sure, but yeah, thanks for watching, and see you in the next time.